name is John Whitcomb. I'm a managing director in FTI Consulting's public affairs practice, and we're excited to host today's discussion. For those of you who are unfamiliar with FTI Consulting, we're a global business consulting firm that advises telecom equipment and service providers across the entire business lifecycle. This ranges from diligence support in the context of transactions, strategy development and business improvement, and also strategic advocacy support on major policy topics such as broadband. As we all know, the BEAD program presents a historic opportunity for individuals who do not yet have reliable and affordable internet access. It also presents an opportunity for businesses and organizations who are committed to making the vision a reality. FTI Consulting is eager to support on this important effort, including through facilitating timely discussions such as the one we'll have today on developing a highly skilled broadband workforce. Here with me to discuss this topic is Lucy Moore, an Associate Director for Workforce Policy at the Department of Commerce's National Telecommunications and Information Administration. Lucy has kindly agreed to offer formal remarks on the important role of NTIA in helping to build the broadband talent pipeline, and also specific resources available to state broadband offices and industry stakeholders. Following those remarks and a brief Q&A, my colleague Liz Rothenberger will moderate a panel discussion with industry leaders from service providers, equipment suppliers, and also NTCA. Before I turn it over to Lucy for her remarks, I do want to review a few housekeeping items. If you have questions for the speakers, please submit them through the Q&A function in the Zoom platform. We'll be monitoring those submissions closely, and we'll do our best to get through them all. Also, please know that this webinar is being recorded and it will be publicly available in the coming days. We'll send an email with the link, so feel free to share it with colleagues who are unable to attend. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Lucy Moore. Lucy joined NTIA as a special policy advisor in January of 2022. She most recently served as Associate Staff Secretary in the White House. Prior to working in the White House, Lucy served in a variety of roles at different agencies and organizations, including Middle Class Economics, the Biden Foundation, the Department of Labor, where she was a special assistant to Secretary Tom Perez, and also the National Economic Council. Lucy received a bachelor's degree from the University of Southern California and a master's degree in public policy from the Harvard Kennedy School. Lucy, it's a pleasure for you to be with us today. Thank you for your time. And with that, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, John. I really appreciate it. It's great to be here today talking about the Internet for All program and NTIA's work to ensure that there's a skilled, diverse telecommunications workforce ready to build out infrastructure and support networks all across the country. Today, I'm going to cover a quick summary of the Internet for All program. I know this group is likely very familiar with our programs, but thought it would be helpful to start with some top lines. Then I'll go over an introduction on workforce and the requirements and guidance in our NOFOs, as well as some of the strategies to support an equitable workforce that we're encouraging BEAD eligible entities, the states and territories, to adopt, but are also relevant to industry partners and potential subgrantees. So to start off, the Internet for All programs, I know you are all very aware of our 4 programs administered by NTIA that we call the Internet for All Initiative, but to give a very quick overview, the first is the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, or BEAD, which John already mentioned, which provides over $40 billion primarily for building high-speed internet infrastructure with an emphasis on the parts of the country that are currently unserved and underserved. I'm going to talk in a lot more detail about BEAD throughout the presentation. But the second is the Digital Equity Act programs, which provide $2.75 billion to promote digital inclusion and advance equity through the provision of devices and affordability and adoption programs. The third is the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program, which received an additional $2 billion to the existing program from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law to help tribal communities expand high-speed internet access and adoption on tribal lands. And finally, the Middle Mile Program, which is a competitive grant program with $1 billion in funding to expand middle mile infrastructure and reduce the cost of connecting the unconnected. Next slide, please. So the BEAD program will provide $42.45 billion for infrastructure planning and implementation. The eligible entities are the 50 states, DC, Puerto Rico, and the 4 territories listed here. I, again, will not read through this whole slide. I know you're closely tracking the program, but one thing I would like to highlight is that workforce development and job training in support of the infrastructure workforce is an eligible use of the program funding. And in terms of timing, states and territories are currently working on developing their initial proposals, which you can see towards kind of the center of the timeline on the bottom of the slide. Those are due to NTIA by December 27th after going through a public comment period, and once approved, will release up to 20% of the eligible entities' BEAD funds. We have a progress dashboard that we recently released online where you can check where each state is in terms of their planning process and approval of their initial proposal. At the end of the presentation, I'll share a few links where you can find that. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk about what we're here to discuss today, workforce. We know that expanding high-speed, affordable internet access to everyone in America will require a transformation in the telecommunications workforce. We will need thousands of technicians, trenchers, equipment operators, and laborers, just to name a few. But we also see this as a real opportunity. At the Department of Commerce and NTIA, we're committed to ensuring that the Internet for All programs create good jobs that offer fair compensation, a safe workplace, equitable access, and opportunities for long-term career advancement. Good jobs are the foundation of an equitable economy, and these efforts will have lasting positive economic, social, and health benefits on our communities for years to come. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we are committed to ensuring that these are good jobs, but what do I really mean by that? In partnership with the Department of Labor, the Department of Commerce adopted the following principles as a framework for the creation of good jobs. We've prioritized these 8 principles in developing a stronger and more equitable telecom workforce. I won't read through all of them, but they include the freedom to form and join unions, family-sustaining wages and benefits, and skills-based evaluation with unnecessary educational, credential, or experience requirements minimized. For more information, you can check out the Good Jobs Principles on either the Department of Commerce or the Department of Labor's website. Next slide, please. So to get into the details, we included guidance related to workforce development in our notice of funding opportunities. Because we know the importance of a skilled workforce to the success of the BEAD program, every state and territory participating will be required to submit a workforce plan as part of the initial proposals that they are currently working on and will be submitted for NTIA approval. That workforce plan will include each of the items listed on this slide, and they will be working with local stakeholders, and in many cases, they already are, to develop those plans and to ensure that there is a skilled, diverse workforce available to deploy this infrastructure. So the requirements and guidance that we set out fall into 4 workforce categories. The first is federal labor and employment laws, which are legal requirements that apply to all employers in the United States and are not specific to BEAD. Skilled workforce activities, which include how employers hire, pay, and consider skills of workers and subcontractors. Equitable training and workforce development activities, which offer on-the-job and professional skills development for all workers. And contracting requirements and guidance concerning partnering with minority-owned businesses and other socially and economically disadvantaged businesses. Next slide, please. Thanks. So last fall, we provided a workforce planning guide as a resource to states and territories as they implement these different requirements. It also included strategies and examples that offer a range of approaches for meeting program requirements related to workforce. I'm going to go through some of the recommended strategies from that guide related to equitable training and workforce development, which will likely be familiar to those of you who are employers at ISPs or running workforce or training programs. Next slide, please. So the first category, workforce readiness programs, can help facilitate the development of a diverse telecommunications workforce prepared to meet the challenges of high-speed internet deployment. So 2 kind of strategies, incorporating apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship programs, or apprenticeship readiness programs, as they're sometimes called, can actively support job skills development, as well as diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion in the workplace. And additionally, promoting flexible, tailored training opportunities, whether that's online or at off hours, can help further develop workers' skills and prepare them to take on additional responsibilities in the future. Next slide, please. Thanks. Investing in workforce development can help develop the skills of workers for BEAD projects while also making them more competitive in the job market long term. A couple of additional strategies include providing wraparound or supportive services, which helps to create a stronger labor pipeline by supporting workers while they get the certifications and relevant experience they need. We're encouraging our BEAD eligible entities to consider provisions of wraparound and support services such as childcare or transportation stipends when considering potential subgrantees and developing workforce training programs. Eligible entities should also consider encouraging the establishment of strong career pathways, which can offer workers an opportunity not only to obtain one job, but also to enter into a pathway with advancement and increased wages on the horizon. So, as eligible entities and their subgrantees aim to support a diverse workforce, they may also consider the following strategies. Again, kind of partnering with pre-apprenticeship programs that are specifically focused on underrepresented groups can offer workers industry recognized credentials that will help bolster the candidate experience and also create a more accessible pipeline into the telecommunications industry. Offering targeted mentorship programs has also been shown to be an important factor in recruitment, advancement, and retention of women in the trades. And lastly, eligible entities can support workforce diversity in hiring practices by either requiring or strongly encouraging their subgrantees to make documented and measured efforts to hire and retain workers from historically underserved groups. So the kind of last set of categories that I'll cover are those related to worker protections. We are also encouraging states and territories to consider requiring or encouraging prevailing wages to help to be paid by subgrantees to help improve the desirability of these jobs and to ensure fair wages on BEAD projects. Promoting project labor agreements can offer stability, higher wages, and additional training to workers while minimizing the likelihood of worker disputes and strikes leading to project delays. And similarly, promoting labor peace agreements can protect local financial interests while advancing worker rights, and encouraging robust benefits will better allow workers to balance their job and family commitments. So there are a number of available resources that you can access on our website, internetforall.gov. I've mentioned the Workforce Planning Guide a couple of times. We published it last October as a resource for eligible entities to reference when developing their BEAD submissions. However, the contents of the guide are also applicable to potential subgrantees, partners, and industry to see how they will be engaged throughout the BEAD process. And in addition to the Workforce Planning Guide, you can also watch a public webinar that we did that goes into much more detail on some of the workforce strategies that I covered today and also shares examples of existing training programs. So to wrap up, how can you get involved? First, I strongly recommend staying involved in the planning of high-speed internet programs in your states. Get to know your state broadband offices and stay in close touch with them. I will share how to get in contact with them if you aren't already on the next slide. Second, educate and convene local stakeholders. States will need a clear picture of their workforce needs in order to properly plan for these investments. So if you are an employer, tell states about the needs you anticipate, where your challenges are today, and lend your expertise on how to design or scale effective training programs. This also leads into my third recommendation, which is to think about opportunities for the BEAD and digital equity programs to support your workforce initiatives. And lastly, since I know many of the folks on today's call are joining from industry and may have their own telecom training programs, please share examples of existing workforce development programs with us at NTIA. We have been collecting these and other best practices to share with eligible entities and stakeholders, but I'm sure you know of plenty of examples we haven't yet identified, and we'd love to be able to share those. So lastly, some links and recommendations for where to find additional information. Our website is internetforall.gov. That's where information on all of our programs can be found. And we've also housed a couple of additional workforce development resources, such as the Workforce Planning Guide at internetforall.gov/workforce development. Finally, I mentioned getting in touch with state broadband offices at internetforall.gov/funding recipients. You can get a point of contact for every state and territory, as well as their progress in the programmatic timeline by clicking on the state in the map pictured here. That will also point you to contact information for NTIA's federal program officer for that state, who would be a great resource. That's, one of my colleagues we have in every single state and territory that is really tracking where states are in their planning process, and would be happy to hear from you. So I will wrap it up there. Thank you so much for your time today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Fantastic. Lucy, thank you very much. I appreciate your leadership, NTI's leadership on this important program, the implementation, understanding that it's a large, it's a significant, it's a historic program, and there's obviously a lot going on. So appreciate you taking the time and providing some great educational material, and allowing us to ask a few questions of you following your remarks. Questions are already starting to roll in, but I would just remind attendees, please do submit your questions via the Q&A chat function on Zoom. It should be a panel at the bottom if you just want to start dropping in questions. That would be fantastic. And with that, let me just start by asking a few questions here. So the first question is, what are some of the challenges that NTI has received from different parties, whether they be SBOs or whether they be industry partners, in terms of workforce development issues? Can you just maybe provide a little bit of context in terms of some of the key themes that keep coming up as it relates to workforce development from a challenges perspective?
Sure. So I think one of the things that we've heard, particularly from kind of the folks we've engaged with in industry, is that people are having a challenge finding workers now. It's a really competitive job market, and we know as these infrastructure projects roll up, that's only going to be ramped up more and more. And not to mention the kind of competing demands from whether it's the transportation sector, the energy sector. There's a lot of investment coming down the pipeline, and a lot of demand for skilled workers. I think another thing that I've heard as a challenge throughout my conversations, both with state broadband offices and with other stakeholders, is there's not a lot of broad public awareness of this industry and this career pathway, particularly for young people, those who are, they're in high school, are not hearing from their guidance counselors about this career, which offers great benefits, great pay, and the opportunity for kind of a long-term career, not just a job. And so we're thinking about ways that we can kind of increase the public awareness of this opportunity, not just as an opportunity that is bringing internet everywhere in America, but also an opportunity to be a part of the implementation of that program and the kind of long-term economic and professional opportunities people will have in areas where they currently don't have service. So I think that kind of the industry challenges now that will continue to ramp up is one, and then also kind of the broad kind of lack of awareness of these opportunities.
That's great. And maybe just one follow-up question. So obviously a lot of need for good jobs to build out the infrastructure here. Have you come across, or have you heard of any programs or strategies that really excite you as it relates to getting the word out to different workers that are looking for opportunities, particularly in this sector, or may not have previously been aware of those opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, a couple come to mind. I know our colleagues in the state broadband office in Louisiana are doing a lot of work with their community college system to they now have programs related to telecom and broadband at every community college in their system. But what they're doing on the marketing side is kind of a broad public awareness campaign around like YouTube and other kind of media channels trying to get the word out about these opportunities because we can create all of the great training programs in the world, but if we can't find people to fill those seats, it will not be worth it and will not support our efforts. And so I think the way they're doing a lot of work around trying to reach young people, trying to reach people who have not historically been represented in the telecom industry, and so that's one. Another, which I imagine my colleague Shirley might mention in her remarks later, is they're looking at getting the word out in our high schools, and in particularly in rural areas that and TCA members serve, making sure that at high schools and middle schools, kids are learning about these opportunities, and particularly kids that might be thinking about, something other than a four-year college as they graduate from high school.
Okay, very helpful. Thank you for that. And a few questions actually rolling in while you were making those remarks. Great case study on Louisiana. Thanks for sharing that. The question is, how did Louisiana get the funding to start this community outreach effort? Was that something that the state funded? It also kind of funnels into a broader set of questions I've been seeing in the chat. Can BEAD funds be used by subgrantees or by states to build the workforce and establish training programs? So maybe if you could just talk a little bit about funding opportunities as it relates to developing some of these community programs.
Yeah, no problem. So, in terms of Louisiana specifically, they have been investing in this initiative prior to the BEAD program, and so the governor set aside funding through their Gumbo grant program that helped establish this kind of network. Within the community college system. So they're dedicating state dollars to it. And they also, I don't, this won't be a surprise, I don't think, because their volume 2 of their initial proposal has been out for public comment. But they're also planning to or proposing to spend BEAD funds as well, which gets to the second question, which is yes, the uh, to the question about whether BEAD funds can be used to support workforce development initiatives by subgrantees. Yes, with the caveat that the states will have to kind of propose that use in their initial proposals for NTIA approval. And, there's some, but particularly in support of the deployment workforce, they can award that funding through the competitive subgrantee process. So that will be a decision made at the state level, but it is possible.
Okay. Very helpful. Yeah, please keep the questions rolling in. A lot of great questions. We have time for one or two more. Another question that just came through: for states and smaller ISPs, what role do community partnerships play in helping to develop workforce development programs or in supporting some of the wraparound and support services that you had discussed previously?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's one of the things that we have been, pushing since day one, which is that state broadband offices cannot do this work alone. And in particular, as it relates to workforce development, they really need to rely on both the industry partners that have been, hiring and training workers for years, but also the kind of community partners who, in many cases, have access to the kind of diverse populations in the community, job seekers, and also provide those kind of social services in many cases, and can be really valuable partners in making sure both that we are creating good jobs, but also that those are accessible to a workforce that looks like America. And I think, making sure having community partners' voice at the table in the development of these plans is really critical, because the state broadband office doesn't know what they don't know, and needs to kind of have that really collaborative process, which in many cases has kind of already occurred. State broadband offices had local coordination events throughout the past year and a half that this program has been underway. That kind of will continue, that engagement should continue throughout the process, because having those voices is really important.
Understood. Thank you. One other question on funding, more in terms of timing. So any updates that you can provide in terms of when BEAD funding might be available to states for starting these training programs? Obviously, workforce development is a critical aspect of being able to to deliver results. And so any thoughts or any updates in terms of timing of BEAD funding to develop some of these programs that you've been discussing?
Yeah, so I think I may have mentioned during the presentation that initial proposals are due on December 27th. Everyone can look forward to a very exciting holiday season. And once those are approved by NTIA, which happens on a rolling basis, so doesn't necessarily wait until that point if a state has submitted early. When approved by NTIA, the first up to 20% of their funding can be released to the state. So it all depends on how the states are planning to use the funding. But if workforce is intended to be part of that initial 20%, then we're looking at decisions, likely some by the end of this year.
Great. Well, Lucy, thank you again for your time. Really appreciate your remarks in the Q&A, and thank you all for submitting questions as well to Lucy. I'm now going to transition over to my colleague, Liz Rothenberger, who's going to lead an industry panel. So you'll be able to hear from some different perspectives of people that are working to implement this program as well. So with that, Liz, over to you.
Thanks, John, so much, and thanks again, Lucy, for joining us. I think that was really helpful, and it leads really well into the panel discussion that we are about to have. So I'll do quick introductions of our panelists. First up, we have Shirley Bloomfield. She serves as the Chief Executive Officer of NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association, which represents nearly 850 independent telecommunications companies that are leading innovation in rural and small town America. She has more than 30 years of experience representing the country's smallest telecom operators, and is an expert on the role of federal communications policies in sustaining the vitality of rural and remote communities, and the benefits rural broadband networks play in bringing millions of Americans the connectivity they need and supporting businesses in the national economy. Under her leadership, NTCA has promoted public-private partnerships among rural communications providers and the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the FCC, resulting in hundreds of millions of dollars flowing to rural communities to advance broadband networks and help close the digital divide. She also serves as a board member of the National Rural Telecommunications Cooperative and the Southeast Reliability Corporation. Next up is George Foucher. George is a seasoned leader in global service strategies with over 30 years of experience, and he currently serves as the Senior Director of Customer Service Americas at Adtran. He has a proven track record in field deployment, professional services, 24/7 customer service, and training worldwide, and has held key roles at ADVA Optical Networking, MRV Communications, and Sonus Networks, where he led service teams through a full P&L accountability. He has a BS in business management from the University of Massachusetts and a certification in managerial effectiveness from Babson College. Next is Jesse Shackleton. He is the Director of Broadband Operations at Joe Carroll Energy, Inc., which is an energy and broadband cooperative located in Northwest Illinois that provides electric, natural gas, and broadband services to more than 30,000 rural locations. He has over 29 years combined experience in safety, operations, engineering, team building, and business development in the distribution, electric, and broadband utility industry, including over 11 years in field operations as a journeyman line worker and more than 15 years in key management and team leadership roles. Through his years of experience, he's acquired vast industry knowledge of finance, risk management, compliance, safety, engineering, operations, process improvement, leading to innovative industry instincts and a strong business acumen. Lots of experience there. John Green is up next. He's rounding out our panel. He's currently the Chief Executive Officer for New Lisbon Holdings, Inc. and its subsidiaries, New Lisbon Telephone Company, New Lisbon Broadband and Communications, Pennsylvania Telephone Company, and Tailored Systems. These companies provide broadband and advanced telecommunication services for over 5,000 customers in Indiana and Pennsylvania. He has over 40 years of experience in the telecommunications industry, starting his career with the Bell system. Over the years, he has also worked for competitive providers, consulting firms, and small rural telephone companies throughout the U.S. John attended the U.S. Naval Academy and later graduated from North Central College with a bachelor's degree in general science and has an information networking certificate from Carnegie Mellon University. A lot of great experience on this panel. Thank you everyone for joining us and kind of offering your thoughts and expertise as we talk about real practical solutions to building the broadband talent pipeline. Let me start off with Shirley. If you could give us a big picture overview. NTCA represents a lot of small and independent internet providers, most of which operate in rural areas. What are some of the unique challenges they face when it comes to recruiting talent that perhaps some of the larger ISPs don't face?
Thank you, Liz. And actually, this is where having a partner like Lucy Moore over at NTIA has been really critical, because as everybody is talking about the workforce to build broadband, not just when BEAD rolls out, but certainly right now, having a government agency that's willing to take that deeper dive and say, but rural can be different, and what makes rural markets different. And I'll just share a couple of things off the top, and I know that John will have some real world applications to share. But you share numbers. First of all, you just have sheer numbers, right? You have smaller pools of people to pull from. You can't put an ad in the local paper and expect to get 50 applicants when you've got a town of maybe 500, 1,000 people. So you look at that. You've also got competition. You've got competing demand for that workforce in what might be a neighboring small city. And looking at these small employers and how do they compete when you've got somebody you'd like to bring in as a technician who might be able to make a higher salary in St. Louis. What does that look like? Particularly again, as we see more and more competition. And then I think rural America has some infrastructure challenges that again are just inherent. You've got lack of housing. One of the things I hear a lot is you've got lack of daycare. So when you start thinking about how you bring people into this workforce, how do you build that workforce? Those are some inherent challenges. The other thing that I would say is that I'm already finding now that my folks are having to compete for the construction crews. So one thing is actually having the talent yourself on your team. Once they get brought into a small company, a community-based provider, I think it's a great career path, but it's competing now for those construction teams, lining them up early, hoping somebody doesn't outbid you. Thinking about, do you bring your own services in because you can't always keep up on some of those things. So I would just say that one of the things that we think is unique about rural is the way they address problems. And there's a little bit of a growing sentiment of growing your own talent. How do you grow your own talent? How do you don't expect a pile of 25-year-old applicants to show up on your doorway. So thinking about things that make sense in that arena. And what I'm really excited to see is the number of our companies that are doing things like working with their schools to highlight what great careers these are. How do you start that early? And we're working with the National Rural Education Association on a number of programs to really push that. The other is esports. We're seeing a lot of our companies getting into the esport arena, and in part because you're able to utilize those young high school students who are smart and technology oriented to actually become your interns and then maybe your techs and then put them into your workforce pipeline. So again, rural can be unique, but we're starting off with you just have a smaller pool of folks to pull from. So
that's interesting. I never would have thought of esports as kind of a way to reach out, but go where they are, right?
Meet them where they are and show them how cool it is. And you know what? You can't do your esports without a great broadband connection. So it's a really nice tie.
Great. And John, I know you have some experience being an operator in this space. If you want to kind of jump in and talk about your experience as well.
Sorry, I was muted. Shirley hit most of the salient points, I think, pretty well. Small companies and rural companies, when you put the combination together, it's kind of the perfect storm for not being able to find a large workforce. And that's what we look at every day. You know, and now that situation is exacerbated because everybody across the country is working, you know, looking at the same workforce. So we're competing against the big corporations, the national companies, and we're also competing against the bigger cities. So kids that come out of high school today, they want to make a lot of money. They say, hey, I'm going to get a high-tech job in a big city, in our case, Indianapolis, say, or Cincinnati, or someplace that's close by. And it's tough because it's hard for small rural companies to compete with those jobs in the bigger cities simply because the pay scales are different. We try to make that up by offering better benefits, and we think we offer a far better benefit package than a lot of the bigger companies do. But when you're 18 and 20 years old, you're not thinking about health insurance and life insurance and paid time off. You're thinking about how much money can I make so I can afford a nice automobile or a big screen TV to play video games on, or that sort of thing. So that's one of the challenges that I think we have to overcome. And I really feel like getting the word out, the advertising part of it, the marketing part, is a much bigger piece that has been ignored to date in our industry. We just don't do a very good job of selling ourselves to young people that are hopefully coming up and looking for careers. The only other thing, and it was mentioned earlier, the funding is a big deal. You can't spin these programs up out of thin air without adequate funding. And I'll talk a little bit more, and I'm sure Jesse will as well, about partnering with community colleges and this, that, and the other. But it takes funding at the state level to be able to do that. And I'm afraid, unfortunately, that in the case of a lot of states, perhaps not Louisiana, but Indiana is a good example, we're behind the 8 ball because we should have been looking at these type of programs years ago, not right now. So we're already too late to the party for that, and we're trying to play catch up, and I think it's going to be difficult to do that. So
yeah, well, and that leads well into the next question that I wanted to ask Shirley. Where does the workforce development conversation or concerns rank in terms of implementing BEAD? I know there are a lot of competing priorities right now, a lot of concerns, not just workforce. And, you know, maybe it's not top of mind right now, but to John's point, you kind of need to start thinking about it early so that when you do need to build, you have it in place. So I guess, what are companies thinking right now about it? How concerned are they?
Well, now that the letter of credit issue has been a little bit resolved, you know, when we think about all the rankings of all the issues, you know, you've got supply chain, you've got matching, you know, 25% matching, you've got a lot of different things that folks are really taking a look at. Workforce is, you know, workforce is a stealth problem, I think, in part because it is what can the government really do other than like incentivize people to move to rural communities. So I think it's, you know, yeah, they can help on supply chain. Yeah, they can help on easing some of the regulations and the requirements. But I think each individual community is so different in terms of what your demographics look like, what your available workforce looks like. It's really hard to dictate something. I would say, you know, because to John's point, it's great to have these training partnerships, and we see a lot of them popping up, probably to your point, a little too late, which is another issue. But, you know, it's interesting trying to get support now for small companies that might not have training budgets. You know, getting the states to understand how that money has to trickle down, who those smaller carriers are, how to not spend all the money on the educational institution and not have it help the employer offset their cost of training. So there's a lot of dots to be connected. So is it important and will it roll out with BEAD? It ranks right up there. But again, to me, it's a stealth issue where people will say, this is great. I got this grant. I can't find the people to build it. Or my construction crew that I thought I had nailed down just got offered by AT&T, double the rate I can pay. Or now I've got a fair labor requirement, wage requirement that's going to make me build far less broadband than I planned because the resources will be sucked somewhere else. So it's there, but I'm not really sure, other than incentivizing people to move to rural America, what we can do, or to watch NTIA and Commerce develop maybe a tighter relationship with the Department of Labor. So a lot of those resources that labor has can be combined with what Commerce has, to really create some programs that really speak to rural employers. And I think that's part of the challenge.
Right.
Real quick, Elizabeth, one thing that Shirley mentioned, and that's the fair labor standards. That's something that really concerns a lot of small rural providers, because we can't compete at the same wage level as big corporations can, because they're national, or the larger metropolitan areas. But my understanding is, and I know this is true in the state of Pennsylvania, where we also operate a company, that those standards are basically being set based on what's being paid by large corporations in large cities. And if that is and it is indeed a requirement of BEAD, it may lock out a lot of small rural providers simply because they can't afford to elevate those wages up without consequently trying to raise the prices on the broadband, which are already, not necessarily affordable to a lot of rural Americans. So that's kind of a conundrum that we do face today.
Yeah, there's a lot of different issues that play into this, right? A lot of different parts of it. So now that we've kind of set the scene a little bit, we've talked about the concerns and kind of the big picture overview. Let's talk a little bit about specific programs and what companies are actually doing right now to bring in workforce and train them. Starting with Jesse, and then we'll go to John. Can you give us just an overview of what programs your companies have in place to recruit and to train new employees? And how long have you had it? When did you set to put it in place? How's it structured? All of those kind of specific things about what your training looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the question. And good morning, everyone. Glad to be here. So the recruitment piece and the training side. So we're a legacy electric co-op. So next year we'll have been incorporated 85 years and started out what we like to call around here closing the electric divide for our rural communities. So here we are, kind of phase 2, closing the digital divide in our communities, and we have seen some pain points with our workforce recruitment side of the house. On the electric side, we've been doing it so long; those programs are there. We have a lot of word of mouth. You talk to our electric line crews, and a lot of their sons, daughters, they come up through the programs and they want to be a lineman as well. So. And they make a good wage doing so. So a lot of our training programs, Department of Labor approved certification programs, those are all in place. But now here comes the broadband business unit and the telecom side. And a lot of this has been kind of a reactive approach. We put out a job posting and we sit there and we wait and we wait and we wait. And days go by and weeks go by, and the application pool maybe get 1 or 2 that trickle in, and likely they're not qualified. So we took an approach where it's like, what's going on here? And we need to get into our schools from an outreach perspective. You heard Shirley talk about in these small rural communities, being able to compete with the bigger cities, instead of being reactive and putting a job posting out there and just waiting to see what kind of application pool comes in. We take an approach of being more proactive, and really it starts with the kids, and you got to get them early. We're talking like junior high level. You really need to get out there. And then it's not just getting into the junior highs and, Jesse going into the school and standing in front of a class with a PowerPoint program. You really have to think about the language that they want to be spoken to, and, meet them where they are, so to speak, and talk to them how they want to be spoken to. And in this day and age, it's through a set of VR goggles or a TikTok video. And quite literally, that's an approach that we have to think about, because that is that workforce pipeline that's coming up, that next generation of workforce. You know, it's not the baby boomers, it's not the Gen X's, it's the millennials and the Gen Zs that are coming up that are going to fulfill a lot of these jobs. So I think just being very creative in how we get our message and promote these awesome workforce opportunities is a key part.
Great. And John?
It sounds like Jesse's got it all under control. No, I think he's had some great ideas, and I agree that the reactive is exactly where my company has been, because we've experienced a tremendous amount of growth in the last 5 or 10 years, and even more on the horizon. And it is very difficult. Like he said, you put the job postings out there, and then you sit and wait, and you get a trickle. And the ones that come in, I'm a fry cook at McDonald's, or I'm a grocery bagger at Kroger's, or something like that. And it's like, that's great. You're getting some interest, but I'm looking at 2 years probably before that person is going to be to the point training wise where they can actually go out on their own and be productive. So that's an issue. One of the things that we've been doing the last few years, and it hasn't really yielded a lot of fruit yet, but that's intern programs with all the local high schools. We've got about 8 or 10 high schools in our surrounding area, and we've tried to set these intern programs up to where if these students are interested in going into the broadband field, then here's an opportunity to kind of see it firsthand. So again, it's not really taken hold yet, but we're seeing more every year. We're seeing more interest in those programs, and I'm hoping that that'll be a good pipeline in the future for us.
Great. And just quick note for the audience, feel free to drop questions into the Q&A function. We're happy to take those questions and pose them to the panelists. But I want to bring George into the conversation because, AdTran comes at it from a slightly different perspective. Your employees may not be laying fiber along the road or going to do in-home customer installations, but your company does play a very important role in building out the broadband infrastructure. You supply a lot of the equipment. You have people out in the field helping some of these ISPs getting the backbone laid. So can you talk from your perspective about what AdTran's doing on the recruitment, the training side for your employees, whether it's manufacturing or, out in the field?
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Elizabeth, for the question. So from a manufacturing perspective, certainly AdTran has been focused in this area and continues to focus in this area over the years. So 30 years now we've been manufacturing product in Huntsville, and we've continued to invest in manufacturing. We're actually investing another $5 million into our U.S. manufacturing, and of course that'll create hundreds of jobs. Huntsville is where our headquarters is, and it's our home, and it's absolutely critical for us to continue to focus on how do we create opportunities, how to create jobs for the community, for the area. So in this area, looking at how important it is to develop this highly skilled workforce, we certainly focus on training, safety, experience, quality, diversity, all very important. And yes, we absolutely recognize we have to get the equipment out the door quickly. That is something that we continue to see is looking at how rapidly can we produce product, get the product shipped. But with that, we certainly continue to focus on the development of a workforce to ensure that those products and the processes to get them out the door not only efficient, but exceeds our standards, and our employees have the training and the resources needed to succeed. So that's all very important to us. And we also recognize that it's important to ensure that the equipment is ready here in the U.S., especially if you're going after BEAD funding. Certainly you'll be required to meet the Build America, Buy America requirements. So having that U.S. manufacturing and what we're continuing to invest in Huntsville would really certainly meet that. And even if you're not going after BEAD funding and working with RDOF, Reconnect, et cetera, having access to the equipment easily, supporting U.S. jobs and manufacturing is still vitally important to us.
Yeah, that's a really great point. It's a great point. So Lucy kind of touched on it in her presentation. I think you've all touched on it as well, but I want to dive in a little bit to community partners that are supporting your efforts. I think community colleges is a big one, but even down to the high school, junior high level, perhaps there are some others. So I'll open it up to anybody who wants to jump in, but can you talk a little bit about the community partnerships you've built? And maybe we'll start with Shirley and go from there.
Sure, I'd love to. I'll do this pretty quickly, but we've started a partnership with Northwood Technical College up in Wisconsin, in part because they've had a broadband academy for a long time. So they have a well-established program. And the beauty is they do a lot of the training virtually. And what can't be done in person in terms of hands-on is that cool VR stuff that Jesse was talking about, to do the training, trying to get that off the ground and trying to get people excited about it. And the other thing that we're doing there, Lucy talked a lot about apprenticeships. People like John and Jesse don't have time to put people through a full apprenticeship program. They got to go, go, go. So what we've done is we've created a badging program. So it's pretty quick. It says, at the end of this person is proficient in fiber splicing or network design or whatever it might be, without going through some of the wonderful but somewhat rigorous apprenticeship program type of thing. We're also working, as I mentioned, with the National Rural Education Association to hit that K through 12 market. Career guides, toolkits, all the kinds of things we can put in people's hands to be like, what? It might be fifth grade where you're starting to talk to these kids about these programs. So those partnerships have been very, very critical. And again, just trying to get the word out, from our perspective.
Elizabeth, one of the things that my company did starting this year is we have partnered with Ivy Tech, which is the community college network in the state of Indiana. Ivy Tech is actually the largest community college network in the United States. They have 42 campuses that stretch across the entire state of Indiana. What makes that interesting is that we are in the process of running the pilot program today. It's based on the Fiber Broadband Association's Fiber Tech certification program. Once we get through the pilot, then we can literally duplicate that at any of the 42 locations. And one of the problems, and Shirley mentioned it a little bit earlier, when you talk about education, is I'm not going to be able to send, prospective students to Wisconsin to get training. Heck, I can't even afford to send them across the state. So the problem is, how do you bring the training closer to the companies that need the training done? And that is, you deal with as many different entities as you can. So in our case, with 42 locations, we can geographically spread these classes out to where they reach the students that are really at need. The big thing we have to overcome now, and again, it's like everybody, we have to overcome the funding issue. How do we get funding to roll this program out at multiple locations and make it pertinent so that it's in place and it's satisfying the needs of all the companies that are looking at building broadband? And by the way, one thing I want to point out, when George is talking about AdTran, is Huntsville is now the largest city in the state of Alabama. And I'd say that is due in some perhaps small part or not to companies like AdTran that continue to grow in this broadband business. So, I guess kudos to those folks.
Yeah, and if I could add to, thank you. If I could add to, just looking from an AdTran perspective, we do see these partnerships, working with the community, working with local high schools, very important. This has been an ongoing, long-standing initiative that we've undertaken, working with high school apprenticeship programs, really continuing to develop our co-op and intern programs with colleges, and that It covers from manufacturing to R&D to services. I've been very successful bringing in interns that turn around and say, after having that exposure and experience, they welcome joining our team as a permanent following their graduations. So it's been very effective, not only to build the workforce, but to continue to shine light on the industry, the opportunities, and the possibilities that exist out there.
And I would add too, we're talking about rural broadband largely and a lot of rural providers. And at the core of every rural provider is a grassroots effort or movement that started that whole quality of life endeavor. So for us, it's been we know we can't do it alone. Those of us in these rural markets, we wear a lot of hats, and John can speak to that. And we don't have time, as Shirley said, to take on all of these matters. We cannot do it alone. So I think identifying these rural markets, who that key collaboration team is, those key stakeholders, identify that critical mass and get on the phone, be knocking on the doors and ask for help, put that team together. We started out as a grassroots effort and created just a small collaborative effort through a simple memorandum of understanding, a simple MOU. And that has since led and evolved to a small consortium, including a couple of community colleges, a technical college, a couple of our key contractor that we have on the property, and another neighboring small ISP, and some economic development folks. That has led to an apprenticeship expansion grant of $110,000 through our state's one of our state's programs. And we're going to launch at a local Morrison Tech is the local tech college, and we're going to launch the fiber broadband tech program. But even more so because we are an electric co-op, so we do have a lot of aerial applications for our fiber build outs. And unfortunately, through our National Trade Association, NRECA, they reported out working with Federated Insurance, who insures the majority of electric co-ops across the country. We're seeing an unfortunate trend line in the wrong direction for contacts up in the primary space. So that tells us that we must get adequate training so that we are putting qualified people into those environments. So the number one core value, every company, frankly, should be safety. And we need to make sure that everybody goes home to their families and loved ones the way they came to work every day. So that's another key focus area. So hence we've worked and developed with one of our biggest aerial contractor here and started a nonprofit called the Broadband Builders Guild, that we're going to use that nonprofit 501c3 to seek the appropriate funding to put these adequate programs in place, with the key emphasis there being on safety in addition to the quality workforce needed.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. It's not just having the numbers to do it, but it's making sure that they are adequately trained, because a lot of these workers are going to be working alongside active roadways or climbing utility poles and working with live wires. And so I think that's a really important point to make sure is clear, that the adequate training needs to be there, and that takes time, and that takes a little ramping up, right?
And if I could also interject, I know we're running out of time here, but also, one thing I would emphasize, looking at the workforce challenge that everyone faces out there, given those pressured timelines, the new technologies, the budgets, it's not realistic to think that everything can be done in-house. And that's where, I would emphasize it's most important to consider to utilize, collaborate with your partners, ask questions about what they're doing, what they offer, how they can help. Certainly at AdTran, we've seen this before. We've seen no two broadband service providers are the same. Everyone has different needs. And by utilizing the staff outsourcing, staff augmentation, you can really scale up. So I did want to interject that as well to consider that.
Yeah, that's great. So I know we're kind of running out of time, but there is one more question I do want to ask, because I think it's an important part of this conversation. As the industry is ramping up efforts to recruit and train the workforce, it's important to do so with an eye towards building a diverse workforce. So maybe Shirley, can you talk about some of the efforts NTCA and others in the industry have undertaken to increase diversity in the broadband workforce and ensure equal opportunity across traditionally underrepresented groups in this space?
So sure, I will share that from NTCA's perspective, we really think that the more qualified people you bring around the table, the better. And what we have seen in the space is not unlike others in the tech arena where, it's hard enough to draw young people into the field. How do you draw young women in? How do we continue to promote STEM? So one of the things we've done here at NTCA is we've created a Women in Telecom group, and it's now grown to, we've probably got about 400 women in our industry who are engaged in it. It is mentoring, it is training, it is leadership opportunities. And there is nothing more gratifying to me than to get an email from male CEOs who say, after coming through some of these training programs or participating in some of the programs that we host, watching some of the women on their team step up and be interested in taking jobs in the more technical side of the business, moving from maybe what might be marketing or customer service, more traditional female jobs, to some of those jobs where we could stand to see some more diversity and some more different perspectives around the table. So again, if we're going to be talking about how do we make sure we get all the right voices around the table, we certainly think that 50% of the population could be better represented in the broadband space. And it's been very, very gratifying and exciting to see. I see John shaking his head. So I know that, thinking about how when these openings come, we're continuing to move women in, but women have to sometimes see it to be it. So we do make a point of putting our women CEOs and our women network staff in front of others to say, look, you can do this. We have a woman, our first woman line person in Southwest Virginia. Very excited to see, her go through that program and hopefully be a role model for others. So we think about that a lot. We do some work in the tribal space as well, simply because I have so many companies that cover across tribal lands. But then that tends to be a little bit more specific to each tribal area. But again, we think there's a lot of value to bringing more women into the broadband space.
That's amazing. Well, we are over our time a bit. We could go on for a long time about this and kind of dig in. I know it's a hot topic right now, but thank you everyone for joining. We will be sending this recording around to everyone who joined. So feel free to pass it along to your colleagues. We'll also include contact information for everyone who spoke today so that if you do have questions or want more information about a particular program or initiative that they're working on, you can get that information. So again, thank you to our panelists. We appreciate the time and hope everyone has a great day.